Welcome to Highline Excel 2013 video number 15. Hey, if you want to download this workbook, Business 214 Week 3, click on the link below the video. Hey, in this video we're going to talk about the if function. Now, we've already talked about the if function a number of different times, but in this video I want to specifically look at the fact that the if function can deliver numbers, text, formulas, even functions, and that you can nest functions one on top of the other in case you have more than two things you need to deliver to the cell. Let's start off with an example we should already be familiar with. We have a list, and here are applications processed. The hurdle for getting your bonus is 200. So in this case, we want to, in each cell, put one of two things, either 500 or 0. I say equals if. There's our logical test. We need to put something there that's true or false. Applications processed, relative cell reference, are you greater than the actual hurdle? F4 to lock it. So when we copy down, that is locked. Comma, value if true, that means you got the bonus. F4 to lock it. Otherwise, the value if false, 0. One of two numbers. Close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. All right, so if this changes, oh, that would be a bummer. Right? If your boss is nice, they'll put an equal sign there. If they're not, they won't. That all comes down to contract, of course. All right, I'm going to Control Z. That's one of two numbers. Now let's look at one of two text items. Now in accounting, we have revenues equals revenues minus expenses. Oh, hey, that's negative. We have a loss. So what do we need here? We either need the text net loss or net income. So I'm going to build an if function to put one of two text labels into the cell. Now, my logical test, I'm going to say if expenses are greater than revenues, right? The expenses are bigger, then I want comma the text net loss. Otherwise, value if false, net income. Now, there are many ways we could have done this. We actually could have compared the difference between these to 0. We could have reversed this comparison and had the revenues first and the expenses on the other side, and then used the opposite comparative operator with an equal sign. But I'm using this one. So you should try on your own to figure out at least one other logical test to do this, because there are many. Control Enter. Now let's test it. I'm going to say, oh, whew, expenses were actually only 2,000. All right, so net income. Now notice, in accounting, usually the label indicates whether it's negative or not. Right now, this is working, net income, and that's positive. But let's go back to that 6,000. Uh-oh. Well, this is net loss. That's supposed to indicate the negative, so there's a negative here. That's supposed to be positive. Well, what do we have in the cell right now? We have revenues minus expenses. What do we actually want in the cell if it's a net loss? We want the reverse. We need to take the actual expenses first and subtract. So we need the bigger number and subtract the smaller number. So here's what it would look like. So that's right. Net loss, the label is correct, and the number in our income statement is correct. Now, if I go back to this, now it's not correct. So just as we can have an if formula that checks some logical test and puts one of two text strings, we need two different formulas. So I'm going to come here and say equals if our expenses are greater, exceed our revenues. If that's the case, in order to get a positive number, I need to take expenses minus revenue. Otherwise, and notice this is greater than, so if it comes out 0 or positive, then I need to go ahead and do my revenue minus expenses, which means I would have a profit. There's one of two formulas based on a logical test going into the cell. And now this is Excel magic, right? We have text that's changing and a formula. 6,000, perfect. The label net loss indicates that this number is a negative. We have, luckily, if it's our business, we love it when revenues are greater than expenses. The label says net income, and that shows up as a positive. All right, so one of two numbers, one of two text, one of two formulas. Now, another type of formula, of course, is a function. So let's just do something cool over here. Numbers, Control B, and I'm just going to make something up. All right, and down here, I want to have a formula that will either add or calculate the average based on what I put in this cell. So this is going to be a label like sum, and I'm going to add a bold. If the word sum is in the cell, I want it to add. But if the word average is in the cell, I want it to calculate the average. Now, instead of having to type it in, let's do data validation, right? Data validation, boop, or Alt-DL. Tab, I don't want to allow anything. I want a down arrow to a list. Or I could have hit L to jump to the list. Tab to get to the text box. And the examples we've seen in the class so far, we were going and taking advantage of our collapse and going and getting things in the cells. Well, guess what? This is such a cool source text box. I can just put sum, comma, av. I don't even have to put it in quotes, and it will create a drop down right here with those two words. Click OK. Is that cool or what? So now we have our trigger, right? The user can just come over and click, and now we say equals if, and you could pick whichever one you want, right? You could either pick logical test, that equals sum, or you could pick that equals average. I'm going to say that equals, and in the formula, we have to put it in double quotes. Any text that's not a function name or defined name, or maybe a table name, something like that, got to put it in double quotes if you want it to work. If that's equal to average, then the true has to be the average function. Otherwise, sum. Is that so cool? We're using the if function to put one of two, either the sum for value of false, average if value of true, and there's our test. If this said sum, then you'd have to reverse these, right? That is so cool. Average, and boom, it calculates the average. Boom, it calculates the sum. One of two functions, one of two formulas, one of two text, one of two numbers. Now, what if we had more than one thing we wanted to put in the cell? For some strange, I already have this formula here, right? So if it's 5,000, it shows me accounting. Actually, I'm going to change this Control 1. I'm going to change it to currency. And I'm going to display my negative numbers like that. And that'll give me a 0 too, because accounting is defined to show a little dash like that as a 0, and I don't want that. All right, you ready? I want to put one of three labels. I either want net income, break even, or net loss. We could even do profit, break even, or loss. All right, you ready? I'm going to click in A21, one of three labels, equals if. Our logical test will ask, hey, are revenues greater than expenses? Comma. If that's the case, profit. Comma, the value of false. Now, the trick to nested ifs is if you get to the value of false and you still have more than one item to put in to the cell, then you know you need more if functions. Well, we still have break even and loss. So we're going to put another if. If, and now our second logical test will be, hey, we'll test for the break even. Are you revenues equal to expenses? Comma. Now the value of true here is going to be break even. Now watch this. This logical test runs. If it's true, it puts profit in the cell and stops. But if it's false, then the second if gets to run. If this comes out true, then it puts break even in the cell. Comma. Now remember the trick for value if false. If there's only one item, you stop. If you still have multiple items, then you have to keep putting multiple ifs. But we only have loss, so we simply type it in. Now we close parentheses until we see the black parentheses, and then we're done. Control Enter. Now we have to test all three situations. Break even, that's working. Revenues greater than expenses, that's working perfect. That's showing up as a positive. Revenues less than, loss is the label, positive number, it's working perfect. All right, I'm going to Control Z, Z. All right, now let's scroll down and we want to look at a checkbook example. Now before we do our checkbook example, I actually want to talk about what's called a null text string and introduce you to the is function. There's a bunch of is functions. Now we know that we can put text in formulas, equals, double quotes, tex, end double quote. Now that is called a text string. It's got 4 characters. We can even count characters in text or numbers with the len, that's for length function. So the length function will say there's 4 characters there. There's also is functions. And there's a bunch of is functions. Is blank, is number, is text. I have a list down below. We'll look at it in just a second. But I want to look at the is text. It's a logical function. It has only 2 possibilities. Either it's text or it's not, true or false. So I'm going to click on that cell right there. All right, now, true. Let's change this up. Could we just put the letter T? What's the length of that? It's 1. Is it still text? Yes. 1 and true. Watch this. What happens if you have nothing but you have double quotes? It's 0, but it's still text. Now this is called a null text string. Anytime you have double quote, and there's a bunch of places we use null text string. We're going to use it to test whether a cell is empty or not. That's one use for it. Another use for it is you can use it in formulas when you don't want to show anything in the cell. All right, but it's called a null text string. Why is it null? Because 0 length. Why is it text? Because we use those double quotes. Even the is text function will tell us that that's true. All right, so that's our first introduction to a null text string. Now let's see in one formula 2 awesome uses for it. Now before we get to our null text string, let's talk about a checkbook, right? There's our balance forward, and we're going to enter transactions. There's a subtraction. There's an addition. And over in this column, we need a running balance. I'd like one formula to copy down and have it always work. Now, here's what a lot of people do, because here's the problem. Sometimes it's a subtraction. Sometimes it's an addition. So a lot of times you'll see people getting the balance and subtracting. And they create this formula after they enter the transaction. Then when they have a new transaction, this one's adding, so it's a different formula. Well, it's the balance from above, but this one I have to add from the add column. That would be a big hassle to have to create a new formula every time you entered a transaction. So the first part of this solution for this checkbook is to figure out a balance formula. And here it is. You ready? Equals relative cell reference, the balance from above, minus 1 cell to my left. That's in this row an actual number, plus 2 cells to my left, the addition column. For this situation, that's 0. And that's the trick. The trick is that we have 2 cell references. And for every transaction, it's going to be one but not the other. So for this formula, for this subtraction transaction, it'll minus the number and add 0. Control Enter. When we copy this down one and hit F2, well, this one's going to work. Oh, yeah, that's the balance from above. It's going to subtract 0 and add because this is an addition transaction. And that'll work all the way down. Every time we have an addition, there'll be a 0 here. Every time we have a subtraction, there'll be a 0 in the add column. Now, we can copy this down, but that's annoying. We don't want it to show. And this is where the null text string comes in. We'll create a logical test to put one of 2 things, either the formula or please show nothing, which in formula language is a null text string. So you ready? I'm going to put F20 in edit mode. Come right after the equal sign and type if tab. Now, our logical test, there's a bunch of ways we could do this, and we're going to look at about 5 of them here. But here's the one we're going to do right now. Since we're entering transactions and we always have to have a date, I'm going to say, is the date cell empty? Now remember, one way to check whether a cell is empty is to say, are you equal to a null text string? That's the syntax for are you empty? Now, think about this. If the cell is empty, that delivers a true. Down here, that would be empty. So what do I want in the cell right here if the date hasn't been entered? We want to use a double quote. That's the null text string. That's the formula element that says, hey, formula, show nothing. I want to show nothing for the value of true, comma. However, if the cell is not empty, which means this would be false, run the formula. Close parentheses. Now, this is a null text string that is being delivered by a formula. It's a thing in a cell. So technically, when you say, is the cell equal to double quote, it's testing two things. Are you empty or are you a null text string? Now again, we're designing this template for ourselves. We're never going to have a null text string here, so it'll always test whether it's empty. Ready? Control Enter. Double click and send it down. That is beautiful. Watch this. I'm going to enter a new transaction. Boom, just like that. So I have a subtraction of 100. And boom, just like that, it calculates. Now let's go down and run formula evaluator on this cell. Alt-MV. Enter, enter. Oh, it came out false. So it runs the thing in the value of false, which is a formula which calculates the balance. Let's run formula evaluator here. Alt-MV. Enter. Is the cell empty? True. So what does it do? It delivers nothing. Our formula evaluator shows nothing, right? So that is pretty cool. Now let's go look at a few other ways to do this. Equals if, and instead of saying is this date cell equal to nothing or null text string, you could say is it not? Not is less than, greater than. If it's not empty, well, that means we want to run our formula. So it's 1 above minus 1 cell to my left plus 2 cells to my left. So the value, if true here, is our formula. Otherwise, show me a null text string. That's the syntax to tell the formula to show nothing. Remember, if we ran is it text on that the cell that delivered that null text string, it would be true. So even though it shows nothing, there is something there. It's just a null text string. Ah, look at that, all the way down. Now, here's our list of some examples if you want to look through these. Is text is checking whether it's text. Is number is checking whether it's a number, right? Is number delivers false here. Is logical, it checks whether it's true or false. Now, is blank. Blank, this function, even though they use the word blank, it actually means an empty cell. So if you really wanted to check for only empty cell, that's what you'd use. And we'll try that in just a second. ISERROR checks for all the errors. ISERR checks for all the errors except NA, because sometimes NA is very important. It means not available. When we do our lookup functions, I think it's next week, not available is important. Is NA, that checks whether it's an actual NA. Is non-text, that's anything that's not text. Number, error, empty cell, all yield true. Is and then is formula, that's new in 2013. All right, let's go look at a few other examples. You can choose the logical test. Do we want to do the date? Well, we already saw how to check for not empty using a null text string. But the null text string would find a null text string or empty. So let's try if and then say is blank. That, if you go up to help and read help, it says it only delivers true if the cell is totally empty. is blank. And then if it's blank, then I still need to show that that's our formula element to say, hey, show nothing. Otherwise, run our formula. All right, so you could do that. Now, Control Enter and copy it down. Now watch this. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to copy this. And you could test this. Watch this. Equals double quote, double quote. Oh, even though it looks like it's empty, there is something there. That's a null text string. And is blank only gets a true if it's really empty. All right, I'm going to delete that there. Now I want to copy this. Watch, I'm going to cheat copy and then change it here in F2. We are checking this column in dates or serial numbers, so we could say ISNUMBER. That would check if a valid serial number date had been entered. Now, the trick here is if it's a number, we want to run our formula. So we'd have to put that in the value of true, and then come to the end. The value of false is double quote. Null text string show nothing. One last way we could do this is we could, if we wanted to check, say the check number, transaction number was the more reliable column, and we were always entering stuff here, and it's always text, I could say is text. Now I probably wouldn't like this is text here because someone might enter just the check number. But let's just say our system was that we always had to put CH, so that would be considered text, then this would work. And we're checking this column, not the date column. Whichever column is the most reliable and you have a set rule, that's how you determine your logical test. Well, if it's text, then I want to run the formula plus the addition. Otherwise, double quote, null text string. Right click, boop, painter. Boop. All right, a couple more examples for if. Here's something I just downloaded from some baseball site. Here's a bunch of transactions for baseball games. Actually, it is the score for every baseball game. And you could see this was in 2012. The very first game was on March 28th. This game was actually played in Tokyo. There was 2 games, Wednesday and Thursday. But what I want is, this is like a transaction. It doesn't actually give us summarization information like who won. It just gives us the score. Here's the team. Here's the away, because they were considered the away team, their away runs. Here's the team that was considered home, and there's their run. So I want to know who won. So let's use the if function, equals if. And I'm going to pick one of them, either the away or the home. I'm going to pick the home. If this is greater than the home team's runs are greater than the away team's run, then what do I want? Oh yeah, the name of the team. Otherwise, if that's not the case, then it has to be the other team. Now, I think technically you can get a tie in baseball. I know you're supposed to be able to go on forever. I guess I don't know that rule. But I'm going to trust that this is the way it goes. There's no ties. Control Enter, double click, and send it down. Now, that works. Now I have my column. Now I could do something like COUNTIF and see how many games Seattle won and Oakland won. But just out of curiosity, I'm going to check and see if there were any ties. So I'm going to say, is this equal to this? Right? The runs have to be equal if there's a tie. Double click and send it down. Now this is a huge data set, right? Oh, 20, about 2,400, something like that. So I don't want to have to go through and look for the trues. So how could I solve this? I'm just going to say count ifs. The whole range here, and what am I counting? Control backspace. I'm going to count how many trues there are. And logical values have to be entered, not with double quotes, but actual just straight text. It's not text, it's a Boolean value, it's a logical value. When I Control Enter, if I hit F2, you see it's always capitalized. And sure enough, there were 0 ties. Now, I downloaded this data set. I was disappointed that there was nothing that told me who won. No problem, I created an if, and now I want to count how many wins there are. However many of the names Seattle or Oakland appear in this column, that will tell me how many wins. Count ifs. Criteria range. Oh, that's going to be these names. Control-Shift down arrow, F4 to lock it, comma, and then one cell to my left. That will count. And then double-click and send it down. Now, how many losses? We have to know how many total games. 162 minus the wins. That will give us Control-Enter, double-click, and send it down. All right, so that was a lot about the if function. We saw a couple cool examples. We talked about is functions. We talked about null text string. We even saw the if. It can deliver lots of different things, one of two things, or even sometimes three things. It can deliver text, numbers, formulas, functions, even one of each, like in our checkbook, we were delivering a null text string or a formula. All right. And we'll see you next video.